Hello and welcome to this webinar, Unified Cloud Visibility for the Modern Enterprise. My name is Phil Gervasi. I'm the Director of Technical Evangelism at Kentik, and I'm joined today by Brian Davenport, a Solutions Engineer at Kentik, subject matter expert for sure on the technology that we're going to talk about today, and also interacting with our customers to find out what folks really need when managing multiple public clouds these days. So thanks so much for joining today, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Looking forward to this.
Great, yeah. And so let's set the stage by talking a little bit about the problem, really. Ultimately, the idea here is that networks are more complex than ever. I've been a network engineer, a traditional network engineer for 15, 18 years. And I remember the days when it was sitting at a desktop computer and you had some RJ45 connections and copper back to an IDF and then maybe a server a couple buildings over, right? And that was the extent of the complexity of the network, and then once in a while I sent an email. That's not the case today. Today we have things like overlays, whether that's an SD-WAN or a VXLAN in your data center. We have container networking to consider. Of course, public cloud, which is what we're going to be discussing today. Maybe you have an SDN architecture overlay in your campus. That's becoming more popular. There's security to consider, distributed firewalls, we have SASE to think of, we have SaaS providers, and so on. And so the issue that we're seeing from a networking perspective, but really from a technology perspective, is that we have a diversity of things to look at, to manage, to consider, all within the context of delivering an application, a service, usually it's an application, right, down to a person, an end user, sitting at a computer, on their phone, on a tablet, whatever. So the problem that we've been seeing is that, well, we have different public clouds that support slightly different telemetry. Maybe they have different formats and how they deliver it to you. Maybe not just the clouds, but also the different devices that you have on your network. So that makes having that total end-to-end visibility a little bit more difficult. And so, and that's really the point, right? We want to understand where in the path between the source and destination, where that breakdown is in performance, or maybe it's a hard down altogether. And sometimes that even means the public internet, considering that most of the applications that we're using today are delivered over a network, including the public internet itself. So the idea here is that most modern organizations are going to be multi-cloud, even if they don't realize it. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Sure, maybe you're using multiple clouds, as in you're using AWS and Google and Azure, right? So you have a AWS front end and it's making calls, database calls to an Azure backend. That's obvious multi-cloud. But if you're using a SaaS provider of any type, even for simple, mundane, day-to-day productivity tools, you're using another cloud provider, aren't you? So that's the idea here. How do I understand how my traffic is flowing, why performance stinks, or why something is offline, or why there was a security breach, when so much of the network is not on premises? It's not mine. I don't own. I don't manage it. So that's the last bullet point. That's the context here. This entire infrastructure, that's the application delivery system. That's what we rely on to get our applications, services. And a lot of the time, those applications and services, they're distributed among multiple clouds. So that's why this is critical. So the way we approach this at Kentik is, well, we need a unified view of all this data. In other words, we approach it as a data problem, a data analysis problem. We're ingesting a tremendous amount of telemetry from all of these sources into a single unified data repository, a single database. Why? Well, because then you can query it all and set up your queries, whether they be simple or very complex, to look at multiple things on one screen. So getting away from having multiple tools, getting away from having multiple subject matter experts that sort of have to confer on a Zoom call or on a WebEx or something like that in order to figure out what's going on. And so you can see on your screen here, just a sample. This is just an artistic rendering of the multiple types of sources that we're going to get information from, and the things that we care about for the sake of application delivery. So Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's talk about some of those telemetry types. What are we ingesting? Why? What do we actually care about, so we can get a good handle of multi-cloud visibility?
Yeah, no, it's a great call out, right? And I think the way you teed it up makes sense, where, networks have changed, and a lot of the people that I work with when working on cloud monitoring are your traditional network engineers, right? That have been tasked with setting up the networking and connectivity to and from cloud providers, right? So whether it be the design aspect of it or in a troubleshooting call being pulled into it, right? Having some tooling to see inside of the cloud to figure out what's going on is really what Kentik's looking to solve here. And the way by which we do that is by collecting the different logs that are provided by the hyperscalers. So whether it be AWS with VPC flow logs or NSG logs from Azure, right? All of that data comes into Kentik, and then it gets normalized and allows for reporting. Additionally, we grab a lot of metadata from these clouds, which we'll be presenting a little bit later, where you can actually see things like live topology views and also color in the log information with a lot more context, which we have a slide on as well. In the next slide, though, I think it is important for us to understand that the aspects we're looking at here, which are clouds, are just a piece of what Kentik can do, right? So if you click over to the next slide, Phil, what I do want to call out is Kentik is not just solely a cloud monitoring product, right? It does excel at that. I certainly have customers that only utilize Kentik as a AWS monitoring solution because maybe they're just cloud native in AWS, right? But a large portion of the enterprise customers that I find myself working with have a hybrid or multi-cloud setup. So on the far left, you can see Kentik does support all of those traditional metrics that are important when troubleshooting, capacity planning, triaging, investigating security events. And that could be things like NetFlow, SNMP, streaming telemetry data. And then also, a lot of the cloud logs and flow data leave out just one key element, which is performance. So there is an aspect of synthetic testing where we can inlay things like packet loss, jitter, latency, performance of applications into the data set to give our customers the entire picture as to what's going on. But for this presentation, we're really going to be focusing on the cloud data, right? So AWS, Azure, GCP, and OCI. And we'll talk through a little bit about the ways that data comes in, and then also the way we're going to be enriching that data, right? So in the next two slides, I can cover a little bit about the telemetry enrichment, what that looks like, and then maybe we can have a discussion on some of the actual UI elements of Kentik, if that sounds good to you, Phil.
Yep, sounds great to me. So let's get into telemetry enrichment. So when we're talking about enrichment, we have the word metadata there. So it's additional data that we're adding to the database in order to add context to those VPC flow logs or those NSG logs or whatever else that we're collecting, right? So all of that traditional telemetry, whether it's flow based or it's some sort of hard metrics like interface statistics, things like that, all important, right? We're going to add context to that, things like a customer tag or a security tag or a geo ID, geolocation, right? We want to understand where traffic is moving from country to country and crossing international boundaries. We might ingest information from your IPAM. We're going to add to that database things like the global routing table. We want to understand what's going on among ASNs out on the public internet. And you can see the list here. It's definitely not an exhaustive list. It's just a sample, so you can kind of get an idea of the kind of information that we want to add to this database. Much of it is public and not related to a particular customer. Sometimes it is from a specific customer. That will help us understand why something is happening. And notice that we're even looking at things like cost, transit cost, cloud cost, because that's part of operations today, is understanding why your AWS bill is what it is. Not that we determine your AWS bill at Kentik, but we can help you understand how you got that bill and where there are possibly like idle resources or problems that you can address to manage it better. And so just as a quick example, I'll tee this over to Brian now as something that we ingest, but might be a little bit difficult to parse on one's own as an engineer.
Yeah, and this is really the key to it, right? So I know a lot of people, when they first start looking at what Kentik is doing with this data, it's pretty eye-opening, right? Because a lot of the times when you're first getting into cloud monitoring and you're using flow logs, right, you might just be writing them to something maybe like Elastic, right? Or you're just kind of writing these log messages somewhere. And if you look at what the native log looks like, there's a lot to be desired here. So AWS does provide information like, a VPC ID, a subnet ID, the instance ID that generated the log itself. But if you think about like when I'm trying to understand cloud cost, right? Just as an example, right? I might want to be able to filter data by what gateway the traffic went out. Like how much traffic is going over my transit gateway and who is doing that, right? Or how much traffic is going over a NAT gateway and who is doing that. And that's just not in the log data. But we do have the who's talking to who and the how much. And then when we stitch in and enrich with metadata, we can give you things like this was the ultimate exit of the cloud that this traffic took. So then you can start seeing, well, what gateway was in use, right? Additionally, all these like ID values, we will transpose with the logical name and give a little bit of direction to it, right? So you would be able to see not just this is the VPC that generated the log, but this transaction was sourced from this VPC, from this machine, and went to this VPC and this machine. And then lastly, you did call it out in the previous slide. I really think our ability to ingest AWS tags or GCP tags or Azure tags helps the people I'm working with tremendously, because when issues are brought to them, the way developers think about the data is not by IP address, right? They are tagging their application by, some kind of, unique identifier, and being able to filter traffic by an application or an organizational unit makes it really easy to do things like cost attribution or just troubleshooting in general for finding what somebody is looking for, right?
Yeah. So let's start with the Kentik map in particular. I like the Kentik map because it's a really nice looking map. It's an overview of your entire environment, right? So you can see if you pinch and zoom on your screen that, like a site in the Northeast is actually representative there of 26 sites. So you can just continue to zoom down and drill down into very specific information right from here in the Kentik map. But as you see it here on your screen, it's a great heads-up display. You see it in Knox and things like that. That includes your on-premises sites, your various cloud sites, and your connections to the internet as well. And we try to make most things in our UI, the map included, clickable, meaning that you can get details about that link or about that site, and then click on details to drill down even further. But the Kentik map is a very typical place to start, where again you get a quick overview of everything. But the way that we approach network observability at Kentik is perhaps a little different from some of the other folks out there. Whereas I think many folks traditionally have done their approach to visibility and then now observability has been like 80% dashboards and 20% exploration of the data. I think we kind of flip that around. Yes, dashboards are important. Alerting is important, something that we do very well. All of that is important. But we have found that really the power behind Kentik is that we are a data analysis company in a sense, and therefore we do more 80% data exploration, network telemetry exploration, and that power allows us to really be able to answer any question of our network, which is one of the taglines that we use at Kentik, and that's what that means. So we can drill down, for example, specifically into AWS if we want, and we can see here, we have an on-premises router, which I can click on and get more information on and look at specific interfaces. But you can see how that traffic is moving, maybe perhaps to a Direct Connect. You can see a Direct Connect gateway on your screen. Again, clicking on any of those components and entities along the way to understand more about that. In the next slide here, you could see that we are looking within a particular region, in this case, US West 1, where I can see how traffic is moving within a region among different resources. And then clicking on any one of those resources will allow me to see various metrics, which we can filter by application, TCP flags, GeoID, whatever filter that you need that's for your use case.
And this, I think, too, just to call out, is the enrichment part that, like, I think you were drilling home and I'm drilling home, right? Is we showed the raw log that is used from Amazon that comes into Kentik, right? This is the output on the other end of that log when it's enriched, right? It's not just log files in a database, right? You can get something as visual as a map. So if you missed a whiteboarding session or you need to see traffic specifically between two things, all that data is merged together and visualized for you, right? So it becomes a really, really powerful way to take a look at this data.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. So why don't we start talking about some of the use cases? We understand that Kentik provides a unified underlying database where all of these logs from the various public clouds and from our on-premises resources and from metadata, that's all in one place. Well, what can I do with that, Brian?
Yeah, so this is, I think, a great point, right? So sometimes I'll work with people, right, and they will have a very specific use case they're looking for, right? And that's always great, right? When somebody comes, hey, I'm looking to see, I'm migrating some application into Amazon. I want to be able to look at that application and profile it first, right, and understand what it's doing before I move it into Amazon. And they want to be able to do that kind of stuff. And Kentik can certainly accelerate at that. After either after we kind of start solving those initial use cases, or if somebody watches this webinar and ends up setting up a meeting, a lot of the times people will say, well, what can you do? Like, what kind of stuff do customers utilize Kentik for, right? So a lot of the big concepts I'm seeing in the cloud, right, is or just in general, is having your all of the data from on-prem or in the cloud in a single spot, right? So you kind of don't have to go between different solutions to look at different things, right? You don't have to go to CloudWatch and then go to some flow collector and then go to some SNMP product. You can just see it within Kentik, which is great. And then within the cloud environment itself, right, the big use cases I see people doing these days is, one is just trying to understand what is driving spend inside of Amazon. So being able to filter for a specific organizational unit or just an asset, like show me all my transit gateways and break down traffic over transit gateway by application, by organizational unit, by instance that's driving the traffic, and give that to me over the last 2 months, right? Something like that, so you can kind of build these trends for either chargeback or forecasting growth, right? So that's kind of a business case, but then you also have the real-time kind of troubleshooting cases of, somebody is saying, I cannot connect to this application, right? We have a connectivity checker where you can put in 2 endpoints and see if the traffic would be allowed. And you can also just run reports on a particular instance, right? Do I have a route to that? Are there any firewall rules in between that would be blocking that traffic, right? Do I have any performance issues where I'm seeing packet loss, right? All of those different elements you can glean out of Kentik in a single plot and kind of start answering these questions. In the next slide, right, we kind of have more of a blown out view of the latency and performance that we're talking about. And this kind of speaks a little bit more towards multi-cloud, right? So think about it this way. You have a data center on-prem. You are using Amazon, Azure, and GCP, right? And you have traffic that's moving kind of like you said, right? A front end in one cloud, a database in another. Maybe it's making an API call on-prem, whatever the traffic flow happens to be. That traffic's going to be moving in between all of these resources. The flow logs themselves and flow data, right? That's kind of standard telemetry data, gives you how many bits and how many packets, right? So who, what, where, when, and how much traffic moved. What you're not getting from those protocols is, and what people will ask is, well, was there any latency from on-prem into AWS, right? Was there any packet loss between GCP and Azure, right? In order to derive those metrics, that's where we kind of stitch in this last piece of synthetics. And this is just an example of a mesh test where the user has set up a bunch of agents in a bunch of different regions. Each agent is testing each agent, and we'll just quickly highlight, hey, you're having a problem between data center A and, US West 1. You're getting 60% packet loss, right? Throw an alert and just get that last piece of the puzzle, which I think is, important for understanding the overall picture of the cloud, right? And then you can use this data on the next slide to, optimize your cloud services, right? So, being able to react to something is certainly important, but being able to, understand where you might have capacity issues or performance issues before it starts becoming, a P1 and you're getting pulled onto a call is something that Kentik can help with here. So another very visual view inside of Kentik is you can say, I want to know what the performance from this instance or this VPC looks like to maybe on-prem, right? And just kind of get that path view of, hop by hop, what is the latency or performance between these two resources, right? This would be just another example of why merging together, telemetry data and synthetic data can be really helpful in painting that entire picture. And then one that's really, close to my heart because I just get asked about it a lot is the next slide is, when we are, I feel like the shift, right, of everything needs to go to the cloud. We're migrating everything to the cloud kind of, started a long time ago and then is like it's still always kind of going on, right? Customers are either migrating something from the cloud to on-prem or from on-prem to the cloud. It's just like this constant theme. Let's see, for the last 10 years, it's been something that people have been, asking of telemetry products. NetFlow data has been a great way to do that historically, where you can take something like the application, trend out who's connecting to it, how much bandwidth it's utilizing, where that traffic's coming from. But then, when this application's running in the cloud, you lose that traditional visibility. By pulling this data in from cloud providers, you just get it back, right? So you can take a look at an application, see how things connect to it, how much data does it use, right? Trend that out over months and months, and then also just set up tests for performance, right, to see and make sure that it's performing correctly. And then I think, security is always the place where some of this naturally goes. Like, I've been working with networking people a lot, but more often than not, Kentik becomes a purchase where the spend is split between multiple teams. Why is that? The query engine inside of Kentik is very, very powerful for just like allowing you to slice and dice and carve up data. I'm telling you, once you start using it and get used to the concepts of dimensions and filters, it's really fast to be able to say, hey, I think this server was compromised. Can you show me everything it connected to over the course of the week, right? Every IP address, every port, and just build that report. And just getting that data in like 10 seconds, right, becomes something that becomes attractive to security practitioners. And then on top of that, there's a lot of AI-driven insights where, this traffic looks normal, doesn't look like it normally did. We do some profiling of IP addresses to look for them connecting to botnets. And then with the metadata scraping from the cloud providers, right, we're going to be able to see things like, overly permissive or underly permissive security groups, right? Things that maybe are blocking more traffic or start blocking more traffic. So there's kind of this natural, I think, way where these two teams can kind of work together and both derive value from the same platform, right? And then just a few quick slides here. I think we can kind of move up. I just have a few more, Phil, if it's all right, just to kind of go through here. Just kind of call outs on, I've talked a lot about synthetics. I think it is a very, very interesting way to merge together telemetry data with performance data. The tests that we had covered really were kind of highlighting ping and traceroute, kind of a layer 3 test of, connectivity between a data center and a cloud. But you can certainly do things that are a little bit more up the stack, right? Like loading an application or running a transaction test, right? Things of that nature. As part of the service as well, we do provide a state of the internet, which is kind of like a down detector style, performance-oriented view where as an enterprise practitioner that has Office 365 or Cisco WebEx, right? Sometimes it is the network, but it's not your network. So this is just a view, of that world from our global agents, right? And then, the last two slides is just one is just a quick visualization just to show you that hop by hop latency, right? And the ability to click on each individual hop. And then just as a little bit of a kind of, last thing to think about, and I'm seeing this more recently, is extending the visibility beyond just the stuff that is, within VPC flow logs or Azure logs, right? When you start getting into the Kubernetes aspect, it's still networking, right? So in the more kind of, I don't want to say sophisticated, but people that are, deeply involved in Kubernetes, networking people seem to still get pulled into these conversations. So understanding like how a pod communicates to another pod or node to node communication, the annotations that Kentik can do here, I think are useful for helping in debugging that and also just helping to speak the language of a developer, right? Where they might come and say to a networking person, hey, this pod is having a problem, right? Just being able to search on a pod instead of like an IP address, which is super ephemeral, I think is an interesting value proposition to pull that data into Kentik as well. So that's my spiel for why I think Kentik is awesome and ways customers are using it and some of the value that we provide in the clouds.
Great, thanks, Brian. So let's have a change of pace now and actually see the platform in a demo. So I'm starting with the observation deck, which I think is a great place to start because it really does show you, it highlights how all of that information that we've been talking about in the webinar so far is coming into one platform. So the information that we learned from flow data, from metrics derived from SNMP and streaming telemetry, routing table information, GeoID, your IPAM, all that metadata, that's all coming into one platform. And the observation deck is completely customizable. This is one that I just created for this demo, so I can kind of give you a sampling of what we can do with it. But we have customers that are using it for just cloud visibility. So they're going to have on their dashboard a collection of dashboards looking at transit gateways, overall egress traffic, whatever is important to them. Or maybe even just one cloud, not even multi-cloud. We have some customers that are using it for more traditional networking, where they're looking at all of their sites around the world, on-premises cloud, up, down, things like that. You can assign it to a level 1 NOC engineer and have all the alerts funneling through there. That's where they start their troubleshooting, whatever is relevant. So here, what I've done is I created a map here of all my sites on-premises and public cloud and the various alerts that they're throwing. And you can drill down into any of those locations, again, both on-premises and public cloud right from here, and begin your troubleshooting process. The active alerts in the system I have represented here in a list, and you can see we have a whole bunch coming in about bitrate, and there's all sorts of alerts going on. Here's a link utilization at reaching over 80%. And you can drill down into the specific location, device, all the way down to the interface. And of course, all these alerts are tied into your own workflow. Your ticketing system, whether it's ServiceNow or something else, your email, Slack, whatever you're using in your network operations workflow. I scroll down here, you can see I have some information about an AWS transit gateway. You can certainly put something else in there if you like, but again, as an example of what you can do with the observation deck. This incident log represents all of the alerts being reported by our synthetic testing agents, which are going to test things like simple connectivity and reachability, all the way up to how long it takes a business application to load, or maybe latency between your on-premises location and AWS, whatever. All of that's going to be represented here, tied into your network operations workflow that you already have. Another place that folks like to start is in the Kentik map, which again, I think is a great way to see how all of this data is unified in one platform. So all of this that you see here are the locations, so it is geographically oriented, but it represents flow data and metrics and metadata. If I scroll down, or zoom in rather, into just the Northeast US, you can see that this represents a whole bunch of sites. On-premises sites, data centers, campus locations, cloud, and I can drill down into individual devices, individual links, and start filtering on traffic, on region, on TCP flags, whatever I like. If I want to look at cloud specifically, we can click on Amazon and show the connections. And this is a quick and easy way from a high-level overview to see all my overall traffic from AWS to on-premises. You could see that here, and then we can filter that for application, TCP flag, region, and so on. If I want to get into AWS specifically, or Google or Azure for that matter, we'll click on AWS in this case and look at View Topology. And now we're starting to see the connectivity between our on-premises resources and the public cloud. Because remember, both are being ingested into the same platform. So we can represent that visually on the screen. I'll click on my on-prem router to get a little bit of detail information. You can see IP address, location. I can click into that Gigabit Ethernet 1 to go down and drill down into metrics if I want. And that's the same for the direct connection here. For the direct connect gateway, looking at the details there, I can scroll down and here we have our transit gateway that we're going to. I'll click on that and click show details, and we can see that we have total traffic, which we can again filter for application, TCP flag. Take a look at all the different things that we can filter on here. We can look at metrics, the routing table, and we see we have a couple of alerts there on the routing table, attachments, peering information, and all of that. If I open that up, we can look at the connections within that region. We'll close the details pane. And scrolling down here, you can see information going VPC to VPC, which we can click on and see where that traffic is going. We could see it traversing the transit gateway, and again, filter on it for things like application, TCP flags. Maybe you have specific application tags. If I click on one of these, notice there's the connectivity checker that Brian alluded to earlier, where we can start to see how does this VPC connect to this other resource. Another place that we can go to, and I'm going to stick with cloud for now, is the cloud function of our menu. And this is very much an overview of all the different information that's important to me. Again, customizable dashboard. So what I did was I put information about transit gateways, Azure gateways, overall traffic, things like that. Here at the top, I have information about the various entities in Azure and AWS. You can simply go into here and search by name, and it'll spit out the information you're looking for, the specific entity, which you can then explore. Now, on that theme of being able to explore data, that's something that we talk about in Kentik a lot, being able to answer any question of your network. What we mean by that is that all of this data is being ingested into this one platform. Well, I want to be able to filter it now so I can figure out why an application is slow or why a site is down, why a security breach happened, whatever. We do that with Data Explorer predominantly. It's a very powerful filtering tool. So here, this is just the landing page. I can choose my data sources. So for example, if I want all my on-premises routers, you can see down here I have various different vendors. I have my VXLAN information. I'm going to just choose maybe Amazon and Microsoft and just look at cloud stuff, right? And then here I edit my filtering information. What do I want to look at? Well, maybe I want to look at if Amazon is my source region and I want to see traffic going to, so as my destination, Microsoft Azure. And then as I scroll down, it's going to take a moment to populate. You can start editing your filters. You can change your time frame and all of that. You can find something interesting and create a new query based on that. So it's very, very powerful what you can do with the Data Explorer specifically in parsing and slicing and dicing the data. Brian, thanks for joining me today on this webinar, Unified Cloud Visibility for the Modern Enterprise. Really appreciate your subject matter expertise on the technology, of course, that's very, very important, but also your depth of experience working with customers on how they really are using Kentik and what their needs are in keeping the lights on today. So thanks very much for joining. I really appreciate it.
I had a great time, and great job on the demo, man. I got to get you on some calls soon to show that stuff to customers.
Absolutely. So if you are interested in learning more, I encourage you to visit our website, kentik.com, reach out to your local Kentik representative, and of course you could check out our blog, our YouTube channel to learn more and see more demos. Thanks very much.